Here are the wide open spaces of Wyoming captured on John Gray's Union Pacific Cheyenne Division. The HO layout is designed to showcase the vastness of the West, with broad curves and sweeping scenic vistas. The UP is a great place for John to display his large collection of brass locomotives and cars. He believes in getting them out of the box and running them for his enjoyment and the history they impart to others. Even though John Gray is a railroad executive, he shuns the modern scene in favor of the late 30s through the early 60s. That means you can find a variety of operating equipment because, as John says, it's his railroad. The layout is a way to recreate historical scenes and activities that John either saw or wishes he had seen. Welcome. I'm Alan Keller, and this is John Gray, the man behind the Union Pacific Cheyenne Division. John, the layout features vast open spaces and very few structures. Why is that?
Because, Alan, that's what exists in the West. It's the way most Western modelers look at practically all the major lines out here. There's just very little out there but the railroad.
The Union Pacific Cheyenne Division has its own 46 by 26 foot building. The minimum radius is 34 inches and the road bed is spline. The layout is a double loop with a lower line and an upper line. It begins and ends at the only town on the layout, Cheyenne, Wyoming. But along the way, it crosses some vast scenic vistas. The Portland Rose with 4 E units pulls out of the Cheyenne Depot. The cityscape fills the area behind the depot. In front is the lead to the massive diesel shop. The ice platform supplies the huge Pacific Fruit Express reefer fleet. The gray building is the PFE Ice House. Way in back is the diesel shop. At Diesel House Curve, the hillsides are covered with snow fences. They protect the track from blowing and drifting snow. The steepest grade on the railroad is here on the approach to Harriman. The triple track bridge handles a lot of traffic on the 3% rise. Harriman is at the top of Sherman Hill. Company houses and the engine service facility anchor this isolated spot. Dale Fill originally was a trestle crossing that was filled in with dirt. Continuing west of Sherman Hill, the Red Desert Coal Dock is on the lower line. The tunnel belongs to the Colorado and Southern Branch Line. Number 3535 is a UP Bull Moose, or 2880. It's on the CNS branch line with a coal drag. Coming out of Hermosa Tunnel, more snow fences help emphasize the big open vistas. The E6A leads the way over the CNS branch line, and back is Hannah Mine number 3. At Ridgetop Curve, the mine is still in view. The clear air here lets you see for miles. Harriman is at the distant right. This coal mine is owned by the UP. Cramps Curve heading into Red Desert is the tightest spot on the railroad. The Red Desert Coal Facility straddles the main line. A stock pin sits off to the left. The E units pass under the CNS branch line. You can certainly see lots of open spaces from the cab of the E6. Tower A guards the west end of Cheyenne Yard. The Portland Rose has made a complete loop of the division. The tour ends between the platforms at the Cheyenne Depot. At the full circle roundhouse, number 4023, a big boy, prepares to pull off the turntable. This engine was the second to last big boy built for the Union Pacific. The massive 4884 runs light over the switch lead at Tower A. Cheyenne is where the Challengers are removed and replaced with the big boys for the move over Sherman Hill and the Continental Divide. Number 4023 passes under the CNS Branch Line Bridge. No need to stop at the Red Desert Service Facility. The big boy will set out 5 flat cars for the lumber mill on the Cabarton branch. The branch begins at the tunnel. One Burlington and 4 UP flat cars are spotted. The freight passes over the CNS branch line that serves Hanamine number 3. The big boy heads for Cheyenne via Diesel House Curve, where it completes a loop of the division. John, your Union Pacific runs around Cheyenne, Wyoming during the 1930s through the 1960s. Why did you decide on that area and that era to model?
Well, Alan, when I was growing up in Boise, Idaho, the Union Pacific Railroad was the only game in town. And then when I went to school back in the Midwest, I'd always take the streamliners from Boise to Chicago. And we'd go through Cheyenne, and that's where all of the big locomotives were. They still had most of the roundhouse still up.
Yeah.
And they had a big boy and a Challenger sitting inside the roundhouse, and it was just to me that was magic because everything was so big.
Is that why you mainly decided to model only Cheyenne, even though you have a large area here? You're basically modeling one town with a few other.
Well, even in a space this size, 46 by 26, we had to shoehorn in Cheyenne. I mean, we still had to compromise severely, so to get anything more than Cheyenne was just practically impossible.
Is it hard to work with such a broad range of era, the 30s through the 60s, or how do you justify some things, and why do you have such a range?
Well, like a friend of mine says, when it's your railroad, you can do anything you want, and mainly because it was sort of a timeless era in the late 30s to the late 50s, early 60s. So many locomotives and equipment types were on the UP that were unique. Since that time, they've become more generic. And Cheyenne hasn't changed that much. If you look at photographs of Cheyenne from the late 30s until even the late 60s, there's very little change that has occurred within the town itself.
Why did you build the layout the way you did around the walls without many peninsulas?
Well, the dilemma we had in designing this thing was to try to figure out how to get the maximum radius that we could get on this railroad. And the problem with peninsulas is they create tight radiuses, and when you run passenger trains as we do, standard length 18, 20 car passenger trains, and big boys, tight radiuses are just not a good thing.
Okay.
So we had to deal with that.
And that's the reason, because you like long trains and you like 80-foot passenger cars, 85-foot cars, whatever. Was it important for you that the layout be designed as a railfans railroad, and really what does that mean to you?
Well, what I was trying to do is to make this really a display for the brass locomotives and cars I collected. And I'm principally a collector. And so this, by having broad sweeps and big panoramas, you could get a decent display of a full train. Peninsulas and tunnels and the rest of it reduce the area that you see, and so you really don't get the full sweep. And the impression that we're trying to create here is what it's like in Wyoming, which is this broad, vast, open plain.
Yeah.
And this is as best as we could come up with, we thought.
John, I've got to ask you, how can you be a rail fan since you are a professional railroader? You've worked for the Western Pacific. You own a number of intermodal yards around the country. It's just so odd for a person who is a railroader to be a rail fan. It's not out of the ordinary, obviously, but how does that all work together?
Well, actually, there are quite a few people in the railroad business who share my interest. I mean, they probably...
Do they let on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They to me. It's kind of interesting because modern railroading, and I'm around railroad yards all day, every day, really don't interest me at all. I mean, I wouldn't look twice at a C40 or something like that. I mean, they're just not as interesting to me because it's work. Whereas this stuff is of an era gone past.
You mentioned that you started out as a collector. Do you consider yourself more of a modeler now, or more of a collector, or a little bit of everything?
Well, I think a little bit of everything. The problem with collecting, there's various aspects of collecting that we're involved in. One, of course, is just trying to find particular pieces. But more than that is trying to encourage and incent importers to produce particular models that we're interested in. We spend a lot of time on that. Getting plans, getting drawings, getting the material necessary to produce a model.
And then providing that to the importer.
Providing that to the importer, who then provides it to a manufacturer, usually, of course, a Korean.
Sure.
That's part of it. The second aspect beyond that is to take models and modify them to fit specific prototypes if they don't already have the details that we like. So there's a lot of that both Phil and I and a couple of others do that you'll see in some of the equipment that we have on this layout. And I think the other part of it is to be able to create scenes that may have occurred for which there's very little documentation. By having specific prototypes made, you can put together combinations that probably the pictures don't exist, or you can recreate it. And with digital photography, that's our hope, that in a lot of these cases we can put together scenes that probably occurred but which there's no photographic evidence for it.
The Cheyenne engine facility is, I guess, the centerpiece of the layout. I've never seen a full roundhouse model before. This is the most impressive engine facility I've ever seen. It takes a heck of a lot of room. I believe it's 6 feet across or so, and somewhere in that area. It's unbelievable. Can you tell me about it? It's
impressive. It's a centerpiece. It's a challenge to operate. But to me, it just makes an engine terminal look like an engine terminal did.
Oh.
And there are so many full-circle roundhouses that existed in this country. I mean, there are places like on the New Haven that had double full-circle roundhouses at Cedar Hills. So I just think it's something that catches everybody's eye, whether they're a railroad fan, rail fan, modeler or not.
The turntable is indexed, right?
Yes.
And Phil Gazzano did all of that?
Well, it was a combination of things. The drive system, of course, was made by a manufacturer, that at least the control system. The design of the turntable, including all of the bracing and aluminum, was designed by Bob Darwin. And Bob Darwin's a close friend of mine and my fellow collaborator in all of this Union Pacific stuff that we do. Well, Bob did the prints and the design for the drive, and then Phil did all of the work and put it all together.
Well, let's get Phil to show us how.
Hello, my name is Phil Gazzano. I work on John Gray's layout. I'd like to take a minute to explain the turntable drive mechanism that we have come up with in conjunction with Mr. Bob Darwin. This is utilizes New York Railway Supply components, a geared stepper motor. And Mr. Darwin came up with the idea of a solid plywood, 3/4 inch plywood L configuration with aluminum channel bracing, in addition to a pillow block here and one you cannot see that is just below the turntable base, and a 5/8 drill rod shaft tied onto the motor, so this mechanism is extremely firm, and that maintains the accuracy that is needed for the 48 stall roundhouse and a total of 57 tracks that radiate out from the turntable. Here we've come up with a rather unique 57 position rotary switch. This utilizes two contact rollers 180 degrees apart from one another that make contact with nickel silver contacts in conjunction with each stall alignment. This is firmly tied on to the 5/8 drill rod shaft by a coupling that is keyed and secured firmly to the shaft above here. Utilizes a contact wiper, one for the A end of the table, and on the top, the B end of the table.
John, you approached the building of this layout a little bit differently than other people. You hired people to do that. Phil works for you. How has that worked out in practice, having somebody do the work, and do you get to enjoy the layout? And do you do things yourself on the layout? How does that all fit together?
Well, what I contribute to this little project, besides the money and the space, is the information about what it looked like and what I want to create. And I still spend a lot of time in Cheyenne, go through all of the time to remind myself of certain features. Phil has the technical ability to create the kinds of things I'm looking for. So that kind of a system works as long as both people are working together all the time. And so that as you go along and scenes are created, you can say, well, that's not quite right. It should look a little bit more like this.
So you have a vision in your head of what
Absolutely.
you want, and you explain it to Phil.
That's right.
And then Phil executes it.
Well, in fact, I would go up to Cheyenne, for example, and take 1 million pictures.
Bring those back.
Bring those back. For example, the color of the rock. I had the hardest time explaining to people what the rock looks like, the decomposed granite up on Sherman Hill, which is pink. And so the solution to the problem was to bring back about 350 pounds of that rock, and that's what you see on the layout is primarily from the granite pit up there.
This is actual rock.
Yeah.
This is how you
That's
put
how
the
we did
ground
it.
cover down.
Absolutely. So the advantage of having somebody, and it's a luxury that not all of us have, I have very little time. As I'm getting older, I have less time and a little more money.
It's supposed to be the other way. You're supposed to
I
have
know,
more time,
it's
aren't
not
you?
working that way. And so I'm spending more time on the road, but doing reasonably well. And so the nice thing about having somebody like Phil do this work is when you come back off the road, you can see progress. You know, it's kind of like a present, and it's neat.